All right, I won't make you sing. I'm not ready to sing because I didn't have time to get ready. Okay, now what I decided to do is we're going to go ahead and start with 10 because we're going to finish 9. And I won't give you an outline of 9 yet. I'll do it after I get back because I don't know how much internet I'm going to have. I may be 2 weeks behind, but don't worry. I'm chapters ahead of you. So I'm ready. I've got it down, and all I'm doing is, when I go back through, I'm able to review and then add good stuff when I add to it. So I won't be backwards, but I'll do especially if I can't get internet on the cruise or whatever, I'll be doing the outline so that you'll have a good outline of 9, and we'll go over the outline of 9. That'll probably be pretty good because 10 is really a neat one. 10 is the sheep stuff. But anyway, we're at 9, and we are still in the throes of the man who was born blind. So, this is one of the classics. Every single every single historical incident that John gives us starts with a semeion, with a sign. And then it goes into a dialogue. And this is a very complex dialogue, if you haven't noticed, because it gives us first the dialogue with the man and the Pharisees and the parents, and the man blind from birth, then his parents, and then the man is blind from birth again. And now Jesus goes and finds this guy. Now, you notice there are parallels. The guy that was at the mikveh pool, the pool of Shalom, I think, or wherever. Anyway, in the temple, when Jesus came, the guy who was lame, right, for 50 years or 40 years or whatever, there's a very similar thing there. Jesus does a thing, but Jesus causes a confrontation. He says, okay, pick up your mattress and parapata, walk all around, which causes this huge problem. And, the Pharisees get on this guy, and this Jesus goes and finds him again, it's very interesting. I think the parallel structure is beautiful, but you know what? I think it's not a parallel structure. So I'm saying, in a historical document, in a fiction document, let's say, this is another proof. I'm going to throw out a proof of why this is obviously historical and not fiction. In a fictional account, what would you do? Every account would be the same parallel structure, especially in the ancient world, right? It would be, if this is a new kind of literature, but, you'd have the sign, you'd have the confrontation, you'd have, maybe an interrogatory dialogue, then you'd have Jesus go find him, and you'd have another dialogue. But we don't exactly see that same structure in everything, which indicates it's not a structure like a figure of speech or a type of plot, right? It shows that it was a modus operandi of Jesus, but not a convention or a developed thing. And I would say this is kind of an advanced proof text of why we're looking at history as opposed to looking at, what they claim. Oh, this was all fiction, right? Just somebody made it up and just did it. Well, I don't even want to go into that realm generally, but if you need some evidence, right? Ask, well, if it's fiction, why doesn't it appear like fiction? At least make them think, right? But what I'm saying is I think this beautiful dialogue structure that is a new type of writing, right? A new type of invention. So we're getting the end point. Oh, went to sleep.
Yeah, we were looking at palm trees.
You're looking at palm trees?
Taking a little tour.
Yes.
So
That was making me warmer.
So Jesus found that guy, right? Found the man who was born blind from birth. And, apparently knew everything that was going on. And, we get this dialogue between the guy. Jesus says, Now are you convinced of the offspring of man? The offspring of man. And he goes, well, who is that? Right? And Jesus said, you're looking at him. And matter of fact, this is where we get there. So that one there concluded for himself. He said, who is he, supreme in authority, in order that I may be persuaded into him, that I may be convinced, right? Because we want to stare at him. In the Greek, one of the ways that we know is we stare at, we see physically. Jesus said, you have now seen him. In fact, he's the one speaking with you, which is, okay, we don't see this as a punchline. I think this is a beautiful punchline. The Greeks, they don't get Star Wars, right? In Star Wars, we get all the excitement scene at the very end, they're giving them the medals and everybody's clapping. This is the equivalent of that. So the Greeks are all like, even the children, the Greek children are looking for the logos without a telos, and all of a sudden somebody throws a telos at them. Throw me a bone. And they do, because this is a telos. This is a telos. Jesus said to him, thou hast seen him, and he is that talketh with thee. He said to him, to Jesus said to him, you have stared at. Not just know. See, isn't it interesting? The King James before translated these words as no, but now it's you have stared at him, and he uttering words with or in company with you, that one there, he is. Jesus said it, and you have stared at him, and he uttering words in company with you, that one there, he is. Now, we see this as slightly convoluted, but it's not at all in Greek. You notice it uses the identity form. The identity form should be a kludos. In the Greek, it's really interesting because of the way that the Greek language itself works. Do you see what he's doing? I'll point this out. This is an advanced form in other languages too. We do something similar. This is why we move into the subjunctive, right? Or the passive voice. In the passive voice, someone else did it. This is like a reveal. That one there, in other words, the one you stared at, the one uttering words in company with you, that one there, he is, right? I really wish that Jesus had used the term ego eimi, right? Now this is almost as strong, but it's what do you call it? It's a buildup. It's all the Greeks are waiting. They're waiting, right? Who is he? Tell me who he is. Well, I am. Bum, toof, ba-dum, bum. Anyway, it's beautiful. Then the man said, Lord, I believe, and he worshiped him. And this is interesting in itself because the words used, it's like the healing words, right? Healing, but we know there's not healing in the sense that we understand healing in the New Testament or the ancient world. Likewise, this word worship, right? Whenever we see this translational word worship, you got to look at what the word is itself. But he was bringing light by asserting one statement. He was bringing to light by asserting one statement. Ephe. He was bringing to light by asserting one statement over another. I am persuaded, supreme in authority, and prosekainesin. He kissed the ground by prostrating before his superior. We translate this to a worship, but what did he do? He literally fell down to the ground and kissed the ground, or even the feet of Christ. Okay, that's very common in the ancient world. We barely want to kneel on the kneelers, right? But these guys are, because by the way, that's the Anglo-Saxon in us, right? This is a side note, but you know why it's more common in these cultures to basically prostrate yourself? There's a couple of reasons. How cold is it in the north? So if you're going to prostrate yourself on the ground anywhere, it's so cold it's debilitating. That's one reason. But also the classic northern cultures have a way of approaching the world that's a little different. Their what honor or whatever. It's like, for example, I think it's very appropriate for us to kneel. In the Old Testament or the New Testament, it's very appropriate in the Greek society to fall on your face before God, which, by the way, was very classic of the, or typical even of the mystics in the medieval period, in that period, right? I don't know if you're familiar with the mystics, St. Teresa of Avila, St. Francis of Assisi, even, of the law of the church, right? And how did you greet, the church fathers, the bishop, the pope, whatever? You kiss the ring, right? And the king. We've gotten away from that. We don't do that anymore. That's the way the world is.
We're Americans.
And we're Americans, right? Well, think about how our culture got to where it was. Why do we shake hands?
Didn't you say it's so you know they're unarmed?
Yeah. And by the way, that's why you don't put your hand in your pocket. My dad always had this, my dad and my uncle always had this thing. They always worried about people who kept their hand in their pocket when they shook hands, because that's considered really impolite, right, in our cultures. But why? Because you could be hiding a weapon, right? Of course, in the ancient times, they didn't have pockets. So where are you going to hide your hand? Maybe behind your back, right? But in our culture, putting your hand out is considered a honor, right? You're greeting a person as a peer. And, that's a far cry from falling on the ground in worship. Here's a translation. But the he, I left that in there. The he, that is the man, was bringing to light by asserting one statement over another. In other words, this word is in Greek, is a logical argument type text, right? It's not a simple word. What do they translate it as said. He said. What did the NIV use?
Said.
Said. He said. No, he didn't just say. In the Greek, it says he was bringing to light by asserting one statement over another. Don't you think that's kind of a complex verbal verb use of the verb? That's not just he said. And by the way, he said is epe. Would be not epe, but a very similar word. It's the past tense said form that we see not routinely, but we see used in the scripture when someone just speaks, right, in the past tense. But very, very strong statement. But he, the man, was bringing to light by asserting one statement or another. I am persuaded, I am convinced of who? Of Jesus' logical argument. Supreme authority, Lord. And he kissed the ground when prostrating before his superior. He worshiped him. He didn't stick out his hand, and he definitely didn't have his hand in his pocket. He fell on the ground before him. I don't know. I think it's really interesting. Yes, he worshiped him, but the context of the words are what is very important.
There are other places in the Bible where they do say they fall down and prostrate themselves, but they use a similar word that they fall down and worship. I wonder what word that was.
Same word.
It's decided to interpret it differently.
Well, see, this is what I'm glad you said that, because this is what I try to do in all of this translational work, right? I want to use the same words in the same way. And I want to bring out the Greek, the meanings, right? So when I translate this word, I always translate it in the fullest Greek sense. And I don't just translate it, oh yeah, okay, it does mean to worship. But what does it really mean? The word itself, right here, I've got it. Proskino, towards, to kiss. properly. This means literally in the Greek, to kiss the ground while prostrating before a superior. That's what it means. So when I translate the words, I always use the full extent sense of the Greek. They call this, what they call it, in annotated. There's a type of translational work you might buy even, where they expand the word usage like this, similar to this.
There's the
Amplified. Yeah, amplified. That's it, amplified. Yeah, an amplified Bible will generally do that to a degree. Even amplified Bibles get a little scary to me because it's like even the word for word translations. Many times the word for word translations, well, this word for word translation that I've got that I use for my Greek source, look what they do. Right here, this word literally to mean to kiss toward, and you see they've even got, to prostrate oneself in homage, la la. They use to worship. So even in this literal, word for word translation, what are they trying to do? They're trying to turn a very complex Greek idea into a single word.
Yeah, Amplified Bible said, and he worshipped him, and then in brackets, with reverence and awe. So it doesn't even talk about the position or, the prostration or anything like that.
Yeah. Okay. To me, I am a writer, right? I love to write. To me, the setting, right? And as English speakers, we always want to know what else, what's happening, right? The Greek really does tell us to a large degree what's happening. And yeah, I'll blame our translators. They're trying to make it simple and fit our culture, and that's cool. But I really want to know. And even the Amplified, they're disappointing me a little bit. Because the Amplified is supposed to be, let's see, here we go.
Turn up the volume a little bit.
Turn up the volume, yeah.
Still on mute.
Amplified. The opinion of most scholars is to kiss on, and they represent, release, worshipers are represented with outstretched hand throwing a kiss to the deity. Metaphorically described as kissing the ground between believers, the bride of Christ, suggests a willingness to make all necessary physical gestures of obeisance. This is just, what I do is when I go for my sources or have my sources, I pull out the most, concrete. I always want the most concrete. Some of the sources have really interesting historical information. Cool, right? But the Greek is obvious. Anyway, Jesus said, and here's what Jesus says. For judgment I have come into the world so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind. And I tried to make this as understandable as possible. The Greek is a little complex. You can automatically tell the Greek is pretty complex in this. Jesus said, for judgment I've come into the world that they which see might see, and they which see might be made blind. King James is catching a little bit more of the complexity of the statement. You can see that this is a pretty long piece of Greek. And Jesus said to krima, to distinguish just judgment, emphasizing its result, ego. So here's our ego statement. We don't get ego eimi, we get ego, into the cosmon, that which was created, to he, she, it, I came or went, in order that may, not or least, this is the qualified negation, she put in that, they may look at, and they looking at to rise of smoke, they may be caused to be. Okay. So we obviously need to put this into normal English sense and understand it with that. And Jesus said, and look, here's ipen, right? That's said, not ephe, which is a very complex kind of understanding. And Jesus said, he just said, to judgment, emphasizing his results, I came into that which was created, They translated world. I want to make a comment about that. It's saying to it in order that they not looking at, may look at. And they looking at to raise a smoke, blind, they may be caused to be. So the translators are pretty close in what they're getting. But the big deal about this, and I want to emphasize this, we are going to see, and we've seen it before, but we're going to see another case later on, a few chapters on, where Jesus uses cosmos and gay in separate statements. And I told you the cosmos, right? The cosmon is what Jesus created, what was created, the creation. The gay is the world. And so, you know, what you might ask yourself the question, why do our translators keep translating cosmon as the world? Instead of as, I would translate the creation. I like the word cosmos. I think that's pretty cool. Though cosmos is still all physical, right? Billions and billions. Yeah, but what about the other stuff like mathematics and emotions and thoughts and spiritual ideas, right? The Greeks said I can prove it. I think they can too.
Can I make a comment about that?
Oh, sure.
That reminds me of, I like, it would be better if they put cosmos because that he's saying he's God, because if he's out of the cosmos, you know, only God is out of the cosmos, right? And he can, so that's a statement of him being God. And I think about like the Jehovah's Witnesses who are non-Trinitarians who believe that Jesus was a creation of God, like one who never sinned and therefore is powerful and all this. But that is like, nope, because in their belief, you know, Jesus was created. So that doesn't work with that. But of course, their translation, they have people who warped the Greek in their translation to say what they wanted to say. So if you look at the English, it could maybe fit with what they believe, but the Greek, no.
Yeah, I agree 1,000% with what you're saying. That's why, you know, like I said, when I'm trying to do, and I don't call this a literal translation, I call it a cultural translation. A literal translation leads you down the path of funniness, right? People pick and choose, like our translators, even in the word for word translation, pick worship. Well, it doesn't really mean worship. It means to fall on your face, prostrate yourself, and kiss the ground. Holy smoke, that's maybe worship, but it's a pretty simple sense of it, right? Exactly. When you translate like the epiuranos, they translate it as the heavens, and they translate the Aranos as heavens. Now, wait a second. Epiuranos is a real different kind of heaven than the Aranos. And how do you translate sky? Yeah, Tammy?
Yeah, I was just thinking about going back to the whole worship versus falling down and kissing the ground. You know, in our culture or in our minds, when we say worship, oh, well, he was just standing there and internally recognizing that Jesus, you know, worship is such an internal thing, but no, he did a public, physical representation of acknowledging that Jesus was Lord. And he wasn't just standing there and internally thinking it, and nobody knew what he was doing. It was a physical testimony.
He gave it away.
But yet we don't get that if we just read the English.
It's the quintessential Lutheran question. What does this mean?
I think it's really funny that we are getting, you know, think of the Greek hearers, right? They're not readers, they're hearers. They're hearing this. They're loving this information because they want, that's why they said, John, we want more. And so John gave them more. And John's giving them this thing, and you notice what they're doing? They have this setup. It's a semeion. They have this dialogue. And you know what? They're not expecting to get a telos, right? And what do they get? Boom, at the very end, Jesus gives them a telos. And not only that, there's an unstated telos. What's the unstated telos? He falls down on his face before him And then Jesus makes this claim, which I think is right on the money. Every Greek person there, even the Hebrews who understood Greek, would know that when Jesus says this, he is saying that he is God. If he had said gay, right, the gay, then everybody go, oh,
Just another guy.
yeah. But he said the cosmos, that which was created, which, by the way, at the very beginning, he claimed that he created. Okay, John claimed that he created. In fact, two Johns claimed that he created, John the Immerser and John our gospel writer. And then Jesus claimed it too.
And he also accepted worship. So if he wasn't God, that would be wrong of him to accept the man's worship.
Right, he was said, oh, get up,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I'm just a prophet or whatever.
I'm just thinking back to the beginning of John. Wouldn't that kind of been like an opening thesis? This is what I'm going to show you here. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was and all that. And now he goes into breaks it down. And I'm going to show you how this works in the rest of the book, basically. So.
Well, even more than that, you're right on the money because you got the point. Because of this, if he'll come up here, he goes, what's the statement? He is the Logos. Jesus is the Logos. He's the Amar, the power word of creation. The question is, are you convinced of the logical argument? Are you persuaded? Pisteo. And the answer is, I am convinced. Of what? Of the Logos, right? I hate the fact that it's an intentional mistranslation. It just is. To translate Logos not as a logical argument. Jesus is the logical argument. Are you convinced of the logical argument? I am convinced. That is an unstated telos that goes all the way back to the beginning of John. And the point of the proof is, you're right. You notice each one of these, they're getting more and more distinct proof texts. You know what I'm saying? We get more and more, it's not Jesus' point of view changing, it's building into the reader. And John, I think, I think history provided it. But John chose these specific incidents to show more about Jesus, right? To show more especially in a Greek and a Roman sense, so the Greeks and Romans can go, yeah, right? As opposed to the kind of looser, although not quite as loose as sometimes we think. When we looked at Mark and Matthew, I think we saw that they were very tightly wound to the context. Some Pharisees who were with him heard him say this and asked, what? Are we blind?
Yes.
As a matter of fact,
Bingo!
Let's see what the Greek says. Greek's going to be fun, right? And some of the Pharisees which were with him heard these words and said to him, are we blind? Also, they heard from among of the Pharisees, these they accompanied of him. So there are Pharisees with him. Remember who was our famous Pharisee? And Saul, right? Eventually. You're right on it. Nicodemus is one of our early ones. But yeah, then Saul. So maybe Nicodemus is in this group. They were, and they said to him, not at least, there's the qualified negation, and we, to raise the smoke, we are, some men. We are blinded by smoke, we are blind. And you notice twice the use of the identity form, which is really interesting. From out among the Pharisees who were in company with him, heard, and they said to him, and we are not, this is not what it says in the Greek. Or you notice what our translators say. This is close enough. Some of the Pharisees who were with him heard these words, and they said to him, are we blind also? Now we know in Greek, right? You're going to find a question mark at the end in the Greek. No. What do you always see in Greek when it's a question? T. You see T. T-I. Tau-I. Iota. Tau iota is the indicator of question. Who, what, why, where. That is the way in Greek you indicate a question form. Okay? There is no T. They did not ask a question. They said, and you notice it's a qualified negation. So they are asking a supposition. So yes, it is a kind of a question. We are not blind. They're making an assertion, but you notice it's a qualified negation. So are they sure? No. That's why our translators put it into a question form. But I think it's very interesting. Do you see the cultural sense here? The cultural sense, a Greek person would have probably asked a question. A Hebrew person would not have asked a question. They'd make an assertion. And you notice the assertion is not a pure question, but it's a supposition form. What would we do, Anglo-Saxons? Are you calling us blind? Right? Yeah, that's us. That's the way we roll, right? Our European friends may or may not be quite the same, but that's our cultural kind of, the cultures are all into this. Jesus said, if you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains. Do you see what's happening here? Jesus, the author, gave us a stated telos. What must the author then do? Leave you with an unstated telos. And who's the author? The author is Jesus. In other words, his dialogue, right, that John is recording. This is really interesting because you thought you'd end with a stated telos. Jesus said to them, if you were blind, you should have no sin, but now ye say, we see, therefore your sin remaineth. He said, epping, to them, Jesus, to raise the smoke, if to raise the smoke you were not, and here's a supposition on, you would miss the mark. At present, but you make a logical argument that are because we look at the miss the mark of you, it stays. Ooh. Jesus said to them, if to raise a smoke, hence darkness and blind, you were, a supposition is you would not miss the mark. You wouldn't hold the sin. At present, but you make a logical argument because we look at your miss the mark stays. I'm gonna ask you a question. What should the Pharisees have done in response to this incident, according to Jesus? You see what the answer should have been?
You are God.
And do what? And do what?
Prostrate themselves and kiss the ground.
Yes, exactly. That is, what you get is you have a guy who was blind and now he sees. These guys claim to see, and Jesus says, you're blind. If you could see, what would you do? You'd do the exact same thing. You'd say, I'm convinced, and you'd fall on your face on the ground and kiss the earth, right? That is the unstated telos that 9 gives us, that ends chapter 9, which is really an amazing kind of setup, right? The important part of this unstated telos is that these Pharisees were with him. Maybe Nicodemus. Now, Paul is obviously not there. He's, still Pharisaian. But you got all the Pharisees, right? This crowd of Pharisees, right? And there's causing Jesus, some are causing Jesus problems, but some are his buds. But they're missing the mark, right? And the Greek audience, right? The Greek audience is always looking for an unstated telos. Guess what? They got a beautiful unstated telos. And you see what the telos does? These super smart Pharisee rabbis just got pounded, right? And the man who was born blind, he sees. He sees more than what he sees, what he stares at. He sees Christ as God in the creation, the truth, right? The logos that created. Anyway, now, when I do the outline of 9, I'll give you all that good stuff. But I gave you parts of 10. Now, when I get to 10, I had to broken this into 4 parts to get to, because these get long and big. So 10 is a good shepherd and his sheep. Okay, so you notice our authors, or not authors, later on, after about the year 1000 or so, let's see, when they broke chapters probably broken around 800 AD. So they broke them into chapters about 800 AD or so. You have to check that. I've got a timeline someplace, but we're not exactly sure when they first started breaking it into chapters. But about 800 AD, they broke into chapters. They didn't break into verses, I don't think, until about 1200 AD, something like that. In that period, they're just starting to get punctuation in about the thousands or so. We have vowels before that. If they didn't do it before the Masoretes, we believe the teaching texts, so probably well before that, the Masoretic text. But you notice our chapter breakers, whoever those guys were, broke it into chapters. But is this a break? The last point was the Pharisees who were with him, and look what Jesus is saying. Very truly, I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. In other words, chapter 10 is a continuance of the dialogue in 9. Yeah, this is still about the man who was born blind, which, by the way, is a critical issue. If you weren't here last week, the big deal I made was, okay, so, the big question, the Hebrew question, and the question, it really wasn't before the Greeks or the Romans, but they still wanted to know. In the Greek and Roman, if someone is born blind, they're cursed by the gods. In the Hebrew, it's what? Miss the mark. It's sin. Who sinned? Did he sin or his parents sin? Well, is it possible for him to sin?
Not before it's born.
Yeah. Well, there's original sin, which I'm not going to get into, but I'm just saying,
Not in their worldview anyway.
in the
Not the way they teach.
yeah.
You couldn't make an action.
Right.
In the Hebrew worldview, it would be impossible for him to sin before he's born. Because the Hebrew worldview, you have to reach the age of accountability, which is 12 or 13 with pubic hair, period, dot. And that's their view of the world. Okay? So, that was the question. Apparently, we haven't got the full extent of the answer yet. Except we did have a beautiful and profound statement, a telos that was stated. And then we have a beautiful unstated telos. And guess what? The dialogue continues. Jesus isn't finished with the Pharisees, right? And by the way, okay, the Pharisees are the educated rabbis who know their culture within the Hebraic thing. So who are they standing in place for? Are you educated? Are you trained at least some degree? Right? We can't claim to be ignorant, pitiable, especially, unless you graduate from Oregon school where they say it doesn't matter if you read, write, or can figure. But most of us can read, write, and figure, right? So, yeah, this Pharisees, they're not just somebody else. It really applies to, especially the educated class, to us to a degree, right? Yeah, go ahead.
I feel like there's another unstated telos underneath this or with it too, because we were talking about earlier how Jesus was telling them that the spiritual was more real and more important than the physical.
Uh-huh.
And the whole thing with the seeing and not seeing, it's the guy who was physically blind who was, as you said, was listening and smart and understood. And the Pharisees, they could physically see that they were spiritually blind, and he was trying to tell them which is actually the real blindness and the real sight and what really matters under there. And that just seems to me to continue what we were talking about before.
I agree with that. I find that to be a compelling argument. We got to balance the Greek-ish with the Hebrew-ish. You notice that the audience is the Pharisees and to a degree the disciples. Disciples ask their stupid question and they just kind of get, right? The Pharisees are the center of this thing, and I think the important thing is this question of knowledge or understanding or education, right? So what you said is exactly right, but where are the Greeks and the Romans? Well, the Greeks more than the Romans. The Greeks are standing on concrete, right? When it says they stare at, it means they literally stare at, right? And if they're going to use a more complex term, they're going to move into that realm. The Hebrews, on the other hand, are, okay, it's euphemistic. We can be euphemistically, spiritually blind. They're getting it. You notice it was spoken to the Pharisees on purpose, right? The disciples, yeah, they don't get it. This is for mostly our benefit. Thank you, God. But, the disciples will get it. And we're going to find out more about that because when we get to chapter, I think it's 15, 16, you're going to see really how obtuse the disciples are. It's almost sad. Mark, it's very obvious. In John, it's a little less obvious. But in the Greek, it's very obvious how obtuse they are. Yeah, and I think in a Greek worldview, remember ancient worldview? The ancients didn't even like to put themselves, like if they wrote the text, they didn't want people to know they were writing the text. It wasn't because they felt bad or whatever. It's because that's just the way the ancient was. That's why they didn't use ego. That's why they didn't use the identity forms, right? Because it wasn't about them. It was about what? The subject matter, right? That's why in all the Gospels, you see really the only guy who's really a Greek historian, Luke, right? Luke says, I'm Luke, I'm writing this, right? And I'm writing to Theophilus, and the Acts, very similar. I'm writing this, I'm Luke, which is very interesting to get attribution. That's very Roman, not very Greek and not very Hebraic, which is interesting in itself. But anyway, yeah, so I don't disagree with you. I think that what happens, watch what happens. Watch what happens. Because we are really going to start moving into a little spiritual stuff in this chapter. Very, very truly, I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. And this is really cool in the Greek. Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that entereth not by the door into the sheepfold, but climbeth up some other way, the same as a thief and a robber. Firmly, firmly, amen. I make a logical argument. This isn't just any statement, it's a logical argument to you. The may, not or least, is a qualified negation, coming or going through of a door into the alton, in other words, not going through the door into the courtyard of the probaton. The first time I translate this in the Greek, of something that walks forward. Probaton means something that walks forward. In Greek, it means sheep. I don't know. Can sheep not walk backwards? I'm not a sheep herder, so I don't know. But apparently sheep are too stupid to walk backwards. It may be like your dog. You ever try to make your dog walk backwards? They don't do it too well, right? Cats don't like it either. But I don't know why, but they're a probaton, something that walks forward. Other things, contrary-wise, footing up. Ana Benon, footing up, climbing up in from another place. That one there, a thief, a kleptus. A thief who steals by stealth is a kleptus. And lestus. A lestus is a thief, a robber, stealing out in the open, typically with violence. Woo, woo.
Lionel, Google says that sheep walk backwards when they're afraid,
Ooh.
when they sense danger.
Who knew? I didn't know. So if you want your sheep to walk backwards, scare them. Well, then they're probably gone. You better send your collie after them, right? Yeah. No faith? Yeah. I think it's, okay, a thief and a robber. To us, a thief and a robber are the same thing. It's not. It's not. Firmly, I make a logical argument to you. One not coming in through the gate into the courtyard of the something that walks for the sheep. Contrariwise, climbing up from another place, that one there is a thief who steals by stealth, and a robber stealing out in the open with violence. Okay? Interesting. Very interesting. I've got some stuff here. I don't think we need to look too much at. This is just the definitions. Here's the point here. And I already said most of this. There's more to the statement than meets the eye. The previous logos ended with the man being kicked out of doors. Remember? You remember that? That was the last thing, and I told you that was a big deal. This is the direct context of the logos continuing in chapter 10. The question is, did all the Pharisees or the Sadducees interact in the temple or the synagogue through doors not usually accessible to the people? This is an unstated cultural idea that exists in this whole break in the thing about them. So, in other words, okay, let's look at a church and a copied from the synagogue architecture during this period of time. And I got one here. I'll show you in a second. I want to make a point of this, though. Remember, they kicked the man out of doors, right? In other words, out of the synagogue. So the application of this is to the cosmos. Jesus is the controller of the cosmos, and he is making a claim. He's going to start his claims about sheep in the fold. And I wanted to have a parallel to this. So churches copied synagogue architecture. And here is, let me see if I can get this. I thought this was interesting in itself. This is from Herodian Monastery at Khirbet in approximately 350 to 749 AD. Here is a synagogue. The synagogue, you have the Ark of the Scrolls, and you have Nehemiah's platform, the columns, freestanding palms. Okay, this is the way that a synagogue was put together in 66 AD. And then here is how the churches were set up. So you have if you notice, you have an apse with the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant's temple. The synagogue is the blue. So instead of an Ark of the Scrolls, you had a table of scrolls. In other words, the scrolls were open to everyone. You had a table of showbread, you had a communion table, and a Bible altar. Okay, of course, they didn't have Bibles per se, they had scrolls at the time. You had a mikvah, right? In the temple, you had a brass laver for washing. On the outside of the synagogue, you had a baptistry. And did you guys see what would happen when a person came to church? What do you do when you go to most Catholic, Orthodox, or Lutheran churches that are more Orthodox than we are?
There's the holy water holder thing.
Yeah, you touch the font. Well, guess where that came from? The mikvah, we call it the baptistry, it's the mikvah. The mikvah was outside the church because why? Why do you think the mikvah was outside the church?
Because you had to perform them, but before you could come in.
Yeah. So you say, yeah, that's what you did. Is you perform before someone came into the church was allowed to participate, right? They had to be baptized. So they were baptized, and then they came in. Orthodox is really interesting because they'll baptize in the church, of course, in the nude. But, most of the baptismal were the mikvahs, right? They came from the mikvah in the point. So the point of this is that the church represented the mix of the synagogue with the temple structure, which automatically, who's playing in this church? If I got Hebrews, Greeks, and Romans, who's playing in this church that are Hebrews?
Priests that came to know Jesus.
I got priests. I got Pharisees who are rabbis. I got the common people, right? And you notice what's done? You know, I hate to put it in quite these terms, but this is and I really should talk about Mysterion. I should spend like a week talking about Mysterion, you know, because this is a reflection of a Mysterion, although it's not a Mysterion, right? Because what did they do? In the synagogue, they closed the scrolls up, right? In the church, what did they do?
Left them out.
They put them out. Now, probably they have somebody guarding them because you don't want somebody stealing your scrolls. They're really worth a lot, right? But yet they are open for the people. It's like, that's a new idea. What about the showbread, right? Where's the showbread in the temple? It's in the Holy of Holies, right? It's not out. It's not in the Holy of Holies. It's in the holy place, right? It's a holy place, right? Where only who can go? Priests. Well, high priests go to the Holy of Holies, but in the holy place, the priests can only go to that which for the showbread. And that's where David got in trouble. What did David do? Yeah. What did they do here in the church? It's the sacrifice of thanksgiving.
Yeah, everyone can eat it, not just.
Yeah, that's what I love about, you know, the Thanksgiving, the hymn, right? The hymn, I don't know what we call it, the offertory hymn, whatever, but it's the sacrifice of thanksgiving. We are offering the sacrifice of thanksgiving because that's the only sacrifice required. And already the churches are set up to do exactly that. This is like way early, right? Anyway, it's very interesting that you see these mixtures, these columns, for example, right? Which we saw in the temple, and you see them in a synagogue. Wow, just really interesting. And we also know that the early churches were underground, right? There's more to this. You say, why are you showing me this? Because this is sheep pen. We're going to get more into the sheep pen. Thank you, Father, for your word. Pray you look after us through these weeks. We thank you for your word. In your name we pray, amen. And
See you guys the Sunday after Thanksgiving.
Sunday after Thanksgiving.